January 1943, a cold morning, the gray skies of Eastern Europe, where the chilling winds sweep across the frozen landscape. A group of black soldiers captured in the midst of a brutal conflict stands in the snow before a line of Nazi guards. Their eyes are full of defiance, yet there is an unsettling calm. As the German soldiers bark orders, one of the prisoners, a tall man with piercing eyes, steps forward. He opens his mouth, and to the astonishment of the Nazi guards, he speaks perfect German. The guards freeze, their faces a mix of disbelief and confusion. This was no ordinary moment. These were not just prisoners. They were more than the enemy they had expected. They had been captured, but in this moment it was the Nazis who were caught off guard. The events leading to this moment were shaped by the harsh realities of World War II, where racial dynamics and the horrors of war intersected in ways that would alter the course of history. By 1943, the world was engulfed in the flames of conflict. The Axis powers, led by Nazi Germany, had expanded their reach across Europe, while the Allies, a coalition of diverse nations, struggled to repel the enemy from their borders. Among the groups involved, one that stood out in particular was the African and African American soldiers, fighting for freedom and survival, often in enemy territories. The Nazi regime, with its focus on Aryan supremacy, held deep-seated prejudices against black people. To them, black soldiers were inferior, a symbol of everything they had set themselves against. Yet beneath that disdain, there existed a cold, calculated awareness. African soldiers, particularly from the French colonies, were highly skilled and well-trained. Though often relegated to secondary roles in the German propaganda machine, black soldiers, especially those from former colonies, found themselves playing key roles in the conflict. These men, captured in the midst of battle, often carried a heavy burden to face an enemy that not only sought their defeat but their complete dehumanization. But it was not simply the racial dynamics that defined their experiences. These prisoners were also soldiers, men who had fought against overwhelming odds and were now caught in the hands of an enemy that underestimated their resilience. As they stood before their Nazi captors, each word spoken in fluent German was a reminder that these men, though held in captivity, were far from powerless. They were soldiers, well-versed in the language of the enemy, often speaking better German than their captors themselves. As the war dragged on, the battlefield evolved into a space where language itself became a weapon. The Nazis, masters of propaganda and psychological warfare, often used language as a tool to demoralize and control prisoners. But in this setting, language was also a tool of resistance. The prisoners, well aware of their captors' misconceptions, had learned German not only to survive but to manipulate the very thing that the Nazis had used to oppress them. The location of this encounter was no coincidence. The prisoner of war camps were strategically placed across German-occupied territories, each serving as a backdrop to the psychological games played between captor and captive. The black soldiers, who had fought in various French, British, and American forces, found themselves in these camps after brutal engagements, where they had faced not only the relentless forces of the Axis, but the deeply ingrained racism that existed on both sides of the conflict. The guards, trained to treat prisoners as less than human, assumed that their black prisoners would speak little to no German, expecting them to be mere pawns in the larger war machine. But the reality was far different. These men, many of whom had grown up in colonial regions or had been stationed in Europe, had mastered German as part of their military training. They knew the language better than most of the Nazi soldiers, who had never considered the possibility that their prisoners might not only resist but do so in a way that disoriented and challenged their own sense of superiority. This linguistic confrontation was not just about communication. It was a statement, one that showed the depth of preparation, the strategic thinking, and the psychological resilience of these prisoners. The guards, who had viewed the prisoners through the lens of their racial prejudices, were now left scrambling to understand how they could maintain control in the face of an unexpected reality. The language barrier, which the Nazis had relied upon to separate and subjugate their prisoners, had been shattered. The first angle to explore is the human perspective. For the black prisoners, speaking fluent German was not just an act of survival. It was a quiet assertion of power. In a world where they had been conditioned to view themselves as inferior, the ability to speak the language of their captors with ease was an act of defiance. These men had been through unimaginable hardships both on and off the battlefield. They had endured the brutal violence of war, only to face the prejudice of their enemies. Yet in that moment, speaking German wasn't just about communication. It was about taking back control. It was a quiet reminder to the Nazi guards that these men, despite their captivity, were not powerless. They held the power to confuse, disarm, and unnerve their captors with something as simple, yet profound as language. From the tactical angle, the use of language became a key component in psychological warfare. The Nazis had long used language as a method of domination. The idea of a prisoner, especially one from a racial group considered subhuman by the Nazis, speaking their language fluently, turned that power dynamic upside down. In a war where every advantage counted, the ability to speak the language of your captors provided a layer of psychological protection. For the guards, it was more than just a surprise. It was a disruption of the established order. The moment a black POW spoke German fluently, the Nazis were forced to confront a truth they had long ignored. These men were not what they thought they were. They were soldiers in their own right, with their own complex histories, skills, and capabilities. From a technological standpoint, the knowledge of the German language was an invaluable asset in the war. Soldiers who understood the language could intercept, decipher, and even manipulate information that was critical to the enemy's operations. Black POWs, who had been trained and fought alongside European forces, had the ability to listen, observe, and understand military commands and strategies that were communicated in German. This knowledge allowed them to gain a deeper understanding of the Nazis' intentions and helped them to mentally prepare for any new tactics the Germans might employ. The psychological effect of this knowledge went beyond just the individual prisoner. It was a powerful reminder to the Nazi guards that their communication channels could easily be infiltrated, undermining their own control. The leadership angle comes into play when examining the behavior of both the black POWs and their captors. The Nazis were trained to dominate with their superior military strategies, instilling fear and respect through their authority. However, the prisoners, many of whom had been under the command of well-respected leaders within their own ranks, displayed remarkable resilience and leadership qualities in the face of adversity. Their command over the German language was not just a survival tactic, it was also a demonstration of their own leadership and unity under extreme circumstances. The ability to speak German fluently represented the solidarity of the prisoners, who had to remain united in their strength to withstand the horrors of captivity and the persistent efforts of their captors to break their spirits. It happened unexpectedly. In the freezing cold of the Eastern Front, a moment of silence hung in the air as a group of black POWs, lined up before their Nazi captors, were subjected to a routine interrogation. The guards, bristling with authority, barked orders in German, confident in their superiority. Yet one of the prisoners, a tall, composed man with an air of quiet defiance, broke the tension with a calm and deliberate response. "Sie sprechen Deutsch?" he asked, his German flawless, cutting through the cold air like a blade. The Nazi guards, momentarily taken aback, exchanged puzzled glances. This wasn't the confused, broken speech they expected from inferior prisoners. This was perfect authoritative German. The moment hung in the air, thick with disbelief. The guards, trained to view these prisoners through a racial lens, could not fathom how a black man, someone they deemed lesser, could speak their language with such fluency. The confusion spread across the line of soldiers as the prisoner continued speaking, his words measured and calm. In that instant, the balance of power began to shift. The captors, who had expected submission, were now unsure. Could these prisoners, this group of black men, really have the same intelligence and cunning as their fellow soldiers? The questions raced through the minds of the guards, their confidence crumbling. This was more than just an act of survival. It was an opening salvo in a psychological battle that would make them rethink everything they believed. The guards' initial shock was palpable, and for a moment they stood motionless. It was not just the fact that a black soldier spoke their language fluently. It was the realization that their captors were more than mere prisoners. They were soldiers, with intellect, experience, and the ability to undermine the power the Nazis had so carefully constructed. The prisoner's calm composure, juxtaposed with the stunned reaction of the guards, created a moment of palpable tension. The guards' confusion gave way to unease. They had been conditioned to believe in the superiority of their race, and in that fleeting moment, those beliefs were shattered. The prisoners' mastery of their language, a tool they had wielded to dominate and control, became a symbol of defiance. For a brief instant, it seemed as though the POWs held the upper hand, not through force or violence, but through the power of knowledge and understanding. This encounter left the Nazi guards disoriented, questioning the very foundation of their authority. The unspoken tension lingered as the guards scrambled to regain control. But the power of that one sentence, spoken so fluently, so deliberately, had already begun to erode their sense of supremacy. In the immediate aftermath of the encounter, the psychological toll on the Nazi guards was undeniable. The moment of shock had unsettled their belief in racial superiority, and the black prisoners, through their knowledge of the German language, had subtly altered the power dynamic. The guards, who had once believed themselves to be in control, found themselves questioning the assumptions they had made about their captives. The moment was brief, yet it carried weight. As the prisoners were led back to their quarters, the guards were left to grapple with the implications of what had just occurred. The language barrier, which they had relied upon as a tool of oppression, had been breached in an instant, leaving them unsure of how to proceed. For the prisoners, however, the moment was a small victory in a larger war. It was a quiet assertion of their dignity and their humanity, a statement that they were not to be underestimated. It also revealed a deeper truth. While they were imprisoned, they were not powerless. The Nazis had underestimated their captives' ability to resist, not through brute force but through intelligence, skill, and knowledge. Though the guards may have regained their composure in time, the psychological impact of this moment lingered long after. In the broader context of the war, the moment of linguistic defiance didn't alter the immediate outcome of the prisoners' fate. The war raged on, with both sides continuing to fight for dominance. Yet the psychological impact of this encounter rippled across the battlefield. For the prisoners, it was a brief but powerful demonstration of their resilience. They had shown that despite their captivity, they retained their strength. It was a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable oppression, the human spirit can find ways to push back. For the Nazi regime, however, the implications were more profound. Though this moment may have been fleeting, it planted a seed of doubt. The belief in Aryan supremacy had been shaken, even if only briefly, and the guards were forced to confront the realization that their enemies were not what they had believed them to be. It was a subtle crack in the facade of Nazi ideology, one that would not be easily repaired. This moment, though not widely known, was a testament to the power of knowledge and the strength of those who had been marginalized and oppressed. In a war where every advantage was fought for, it was a reminder that language, understanding, and intellect were weapons just as potent as any rifle or tank. The significance of this moment stretches far beyond the battlefield. It was a confrontation not just of soldiers, but of ideologies. In the midst of a war defined by violence and destruction, the ability of the black POWs to speak the language of their captors was a reminder that humanity cannot be reduced to simplistic notions of race, power, and superiority. Language, a tool often used to divide and conquer, became a bridge for resistance. It shattered the Nazi myth of racial dominance, showing that the true strength of a people lies not in their skin color but in their intellect, resilience, and unity. This encounter serves as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest hours of history, the human spirit finds ways to assert itself. It wasn't the force of arms that shifted the balance in that moment. It was the force of knowledge, a reminder that language is not just a means of communication, but a weapon in its own right. For the prisoners, it was a quiet victory, a demonstration of their undying will to survive. For the Nazi guards, it was a moment of profound disorientation, a challenge to the very foundation of their worldview. In the grand narrative of World War II, this moment may have been small, but its implications resonate far beyond the battlefield, reminding us of the power of knowledge, unity, and resistance in the face of oppression.